resolution where we have, through military, diplomatic, security effects, made it abundantly clear to Putin that he cannot prevail in Ukraine militarily, might force him at least into finally abandoning his ambitions to stop Ukraine being a country, which is what it wants. That is phase one, and we are not there yet.
We spent a lot of time discussing the many challenges facing us at home, but what of the ever-growing tensions abroad? Russia's war in Ukraine continues, and the Chinese regime continues to cause concerns over both politics in Taiwan and the security of our politics here in the UK.
So how should these politicians and officials be reading the constantly changing foreign policy and security landscape? Joining us now is Alex Younger, who until 2 years ago was the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, better known perhaps as MI6. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just want to start by asking you about all the various stories about Liz Truss's phone being hacked by the Russians, about Suella Braverman not following protocols concerning secrecy as a cabinet minister. What is your understanding of what should be expected of ministers and indeed prime ministers in terms of their official work and their contacts in the electronic media?
Well, I think there's a broader issue here, and I encourage us not to be throwing too many stones at the moment about the general levels of cybersecurity that exist around all of the critical functions in our country. Levels of education aren't high enough, and I don't think people are focusing enough on the risks to their security and their devices, because these are hidden threats that aren't properly understood. I think that's as true of ministers as anyone else, and there's a premium on making sure that they're properly educated. And then there are a set of rules, of course. I don't know the detail of these cases, and I can't really say one way or the other what the any transgression might have consisted of. I would be extremely surprised, by the way, though, if the sort of material that we handled in the agencies, so secret intelligence material, gets anywhere near mobile devices connected to the internet in ministerial hands or otherwise.
I heard one expert say this morning that basically they should only be using so-called secure phones and secure computers, both for their personal and their official business. Would you agree with that?
There's no such thing. So if something's connected to the internet, it's inherently vulnerable one way or the other. It's about management of risk. And so I would steer away from statements quite as blanket as that. But I certainly think that people should understand the risks. And by the way, I think we should avoid the seductive idea of a completely secure device. There's no such thing if it is connected to the internet. That goes back to the education point I was making earlier.
So, Alex, given what you've just said and about managing risk, do you think that ministers should be taking their phones into meetings with nations, representatives from nations that we're not necessarily overly friendly with?
Again, I mean, I think it's important to be providing people with simple and clear advice. What I would want is for them to understand the vulnerabilities of doing that.
Just to be clear, how would you assess the level of threat? I mean, are you basically saying that the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians are just out there constantly trying to hack into these channels of communication?
Yeah, I think what we call the attack surface is going up all the time. A lot of our life is lived in the digital domain, which is intrinsically vulnerable. And the techniques and tools available to offensive cyber operators are becoming more sophisticated. And the issue here, by the way, is also a sort of proliferation one. It's not just the state threat, the sort of thing I would have been dealing with. If you look at Pegasus, the notorious malware created by the NSO group, an Israeli company, that for a while could be got onto your phone through a vulnerability in the iMessage that in a way that didn't even require you to do anything stupid. It's what we call a zero-click attack. So a lot of this is about risk management, about understanding what can be done, about understanding the need to just do the basics right and make yourself as low a target as possible. And as I say, us all being reasonably humble about the need to educate ourselves better on all of these issues.
Now, the British and American security services, in the run-up to the conflict in Ukraine, took the unusual decision of making a lot of material intelligence available so that the world could see what was going on. Now that there is a terrible war going on in Yugoslavia, is that still the policy?
No, I'm incredibly proud of the way my former colleagues used intelligence. There's a fact that often the sources and methods used to get that intelligence are very delicate. We should not be in any way cavalier about the way in which we use such material, but equally, it's collected for a reason, often employing people putting themselves at personal risk to do so. And it's incumbent on us to make sure it has an effect. And it really had an effect in this case. They obviously thought extremely carefully about the risk-reward balance of doing this. But what it did is it completely shot Putin's fox. It made any claim on his part that he had been provoked into this war risible. And I think it did a huge amount to pull together that alliance in a way that was cohesive and in a way that was a huge downside surprise for Vladimir Putin. So I think it's good. I've always thought that, we need to remember the purpose of intelligence collection, which is not intelligence collection. It's to change things that matter. And using it, including publicly, has got to be a part of that tool set. So I welcome this development. Obviously, we're not going to be cavalier about it, but this material is there. It's collected at cost and risk. It's there to be used.
I'm interested then in your take on what Russia is currently doing, talking about the pipeline explosion, suggesting that that was something that the UK was responsible for, essentially turning that into propaganda material. Do you think that Putin has learnt some of those lessons from the early stages of this conflict and is now turning things to his advantage when it comes to using propaganda?
Well, look, he's obviously got an intelligence background, but the Russians have been doing disinformation propaganda since the time of the Tsar. It's a thing that they appear to attach particular importance to. It's absolutely not new. And we don't do disinformation. What we do is operationalizing the truth. That is the big difference. But, they have been at this for a while. And of course, in cyber and in the digital domain, they've got a whole new set of opportunities. Now, when it comes to the sort of stuff they've been saying recently, the idea that, we were involved in the sabotage of the pipeline or that Ukraine's intent on making a dirty bomb, that's all rubbish, clearly. To be absolutely clear, there is no grounds there at all. But in the warped world in which Vladimir Putin lives, I don't know. I mean, he probably uses disinformation. Maybe someone's told him it's true. There's no checks and balances on the way information is transmitted within an autocracy. I would say, sorry, can I just
carry on? Yeah, please.
Yeah, which is that in the context of the dirty bomb, and I think probably also these ludicrous claims around the pipeline, there has been one good side effect, which is that the Russians got in touch and wanted to talk, and that's positive. A thing that has really worried me about this war is a complete paucity of any real meaningful senior level contacts. And I think I would expect that conversation to have allowed the Western side to have laid out really clearly its aims for Putin to be defeated in Ukraine and to put the Russians on the spot and extract from them undertakings that they will behave with restraint, say, in the respect of nuclear use. Now, you may choose not to believe those undertakings, but it's a start that conversation even happened.
What is your best assessment of the state of the Ukraine conflict right now?
Well, I think we're going into a score draw at the moment, and 8 months on. So if you'd said to me on the 24th of February that that's where we would be now, I'd have taken it. I would have been delighted. And it's a massive testament to the will and sheer imagination of Ukraine and its resilience, and of course the quality of Western support. But it is only a score draw. I think we are getting a bit carried away when we imagine that Ukraine is about to advance and carry it all before it. And certainly Putin goes into the winter with a significant amount of confidence that Europe writ large will buckle in the face of his energy blackmail. And I think that's misplaced confidence, but he certainly doesn't think that he's losing yet.
So you feel that it will end up with Ukraine having to give up territory?
I think it's far too early to say that. So I think Western policy, which has been pretty unsettled, I would completely acknowledge, is fundamentally for this to end in a way that means that it actually has finished rather than just provided Putin with some kind of frozen conflict where he regenerates his forces and tries again. And until there's really clear indication that he's completely given up on any idea that he can win this militarily, there isn't a conversation. After that, there is a conversation. Obviously, that is how this ends. But any idea that that's done over the heads of the Ukrainians against their wishes, which is clearly what Putin's angling for, I don't see any appetite for that within the West.
But do you think it's realistic to suggest that President Putin will ever give up on his military aims? I mean, that's what you seem to suggest would be a start of an end point. But from everything that we see from Russia, that doesn't look like it will ever be possible.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think we need to have low expectations of meaningful, sort of diplomatically endorsed peace while Putin is in power. So I think it is more likely eventually that he is fought to a standstill, increasingly tries to impose a frozen conflict and hold on to what he's got in Ukraine, with the Ukrainians increasingly pressurizing that. But as I said, the forces are quite evenly balanced, and I don't think that happens overnight. But yeah, a sort of change of heart, a change in the character of Vladimir Putin, yeah, you're right, that's very unlikely.
So ultimately, if we take that to its logical conclusion, really resolution could only come if President Putin were no longer in power.
I think resolution that augurs Russia's reintegration into the international community, the full lifting of sanctions, etc., that's absolutely true. Resolution where we have, through military, diplomatic, security effects, made it abundantly clear to Putin that he cannot prevail in Ukraine militarily, might force him at least into finally abandoning his ambitions to stop Ukraine being a country, which is what it wants. That is phase one, and we are not there yet.
Finally, you talked about the case of Russia being allowed back into the international community. Do you think really the story of the next few decades is going to be so-called decoupling, with both in the tech area and militarily, basically the West retreating back into its shell and becoming effectively the competitor with China, Russia?
Well, I agree with the first half of that statement, and it's important to notice I'm old enough to remember at the end of the Cold War, we thought democracy was the answer, and the only question was how long it was going to take everyone to catch up. It's now obvious that was massively over-optimistic, and the world is diverging into different blocks, and there's a competition between value systems, and that is going to end in a degree of decoupling in key areas, strategic areas like data and high technology. Retreating into our shell, I would really reject that. This is the West's opportunity to remember what it's for, double down on its strengths, renew its alliances, empower its innovation. That doesn't sound very much to me like retreating into our shell. On the contrary, I think there's an opportunity here, boosted by the really extraordinary cohesion shown in Ukraine, to actually get our act together.
That sounds like it would be quite expensive, though. Would you look to the government to invest in those kind of ambitions? 3% defence target, for example, maybe even more than that?
No, I think, I mean, maybe, but I think that the things that I want to see happen, most importantly of all, maintaining our capacity to innovate technically faster than our authoritarian rivals, isn't just not expensive. The alternatives are very expensive, becoming completely dependent on products, goods and services and data provided from other regimes. That sounds very expensive to me.
And finally, I have to ask you that there was a story in the last fortnight of RAF fast jet pilots recruited to help train Chinese counterparts. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I don't know the truth of that, but clearly if that's true, it shouldn't be happening.
Sir Alex Younger, thank you for joining us on Sunday morning.